You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 7. In this episode I'm flying solo because I want to talk about ADHD BCE and the reason why I wanted to do the podcast in the first place. It's something I've been wanting to do for a little while, so if not now, when? So I'm going to dive straight in with this. I guess what I really want to do is share my experiences with and views on archaeology and neurodiversity, and also the potential I see in both. So the archaeologist in me wants to share and continue to learn all these fascinating details about the ancient past, and the neurodivergent in me wants to shout from the rooftops about how humanity has benefited from neurodiversity. But it's all well and good me feeling passionate and positive, but one thing I've learned over the years is that other people don't know what's going on inside my nervous system. So I'm going to attempt to share my love and enthusiasm and hopefully show what I hope this podcast can do, which is to help others be proud of who we are and kindle some optimism for the future. To do this, I'll have to get personal about archaeology and, of course, ADHD. And if we're okay for time, I might introduce a new idea I've had, but we're gonna see how we are for time. So what I'm going to do is talk about how ADHD affected me growing up and how archaeology flipped my little world the right way up. The reason I'm doing this exercise is to hopefully highlight some common ADHD experiences and explain how I've ended up working with the fantastic peeps at the Archaeology Podcast Network. As a disclaimer, though, we've all got our own unique flavour. So if you're on the spectrum, you may have different traits to myself, and you're certainly going to have had some different, but some similar, but many different experiences that are bound to have affected how you've developed into the wonderful human you are today, and as it did with me and as it is with everyone. Because, I mean, our environments, they massively impact how we show up in the world. So please don't think I'm speaking for all neurodivergents. I'm simply using myself as an example of an ADHDer. In fact, I should clarify that it's not just ADHD. I've also been diagnosed with ADHD twice now. So I'm 100% certain about that, but I'm also 100% certain that I'm autistic. I've spoken to quite a few professionals about it. I'm pretty sure I have dyscalculia or dyscalculia, depending on how you're supposed to say it. I haven't got a clue. I suffer with time blindness, and I'm pretty sure I'm dyspraxic as well. I'm certainly incredibly clumsy. I'm one of those people that can be holding a cup of tea 1 minute and then it'll be smashed on the floor because I forgot I was holding a cup of tea. And I'm also all thumbs. But put me on a sports pitch or something, I'm awesome. So I don't get it. It's a bit of a weird one. With all that, I'm not really sure where it all begins and where it ends, to be honest. It's just lots of fun and mostly frustrating. Anyway, so let's fly back now to the archaeological age of 1981, because the environment is crucial here, and that's in 1981 is where this particular ADHD was born into a farming family. Actually, I now know that are all massively on the spectrum as well, all undiagnosed and some in denial, some slowly opening up to the concept. Actually, I just want to quickly share a recurring thought that accompanies me through life. Actually, it's this thing that being brought up in what is now the previous century in what was a very rural location. I feel like I'm part of a generation that lived more closely to our ancestors' way of life than my children's generation doing. There was no internet, no phones, nothing really. We got the curly wired phone in the kitchen. There was a bit of TV. There was no gaming. I literally spent my childhood meandering through nature and entertaining myself, which didn't always lead to the best choices, although I now understand that climbing on the rooftops and helping myself to alcohol and cigarettes and things like that was more a result of dopamine deficiency than a reflection of me as a terrible little shite. I'm learning to forgive myself. Yeah, I mean, how many ADHDers have made so many of those apparently stupid decisions in the name of impulsivity? So I think if I can forgive myself for being a little wayward when I was younger, I think you should too. I think we all should, really. We need to move on. So growing up in the middle of nowhere with no one to play with it's kind of inevitably led to some serious daydreaming. I mention this because a lot of neurodivergent people are daydreamers, and this can sometimes be the result of some traumas or overwhelm or boredom or CPTSD that many of us develop. And it can be wonderful and it can be dreadful. In my case, I fell pretty deep into some of those daydreams, and in all honesty, I only recently have been able to sort of get them under control, and that is to say, to sort of develop the ability to step out of fantasy and spend more time in reality, which turns out to be less frightening as an adult with a diagnosis and self-awareness. Tip of the cap to Kathy Charlton, who's already been on the podcast. Thank you, Kathy. I think, as was the case with, the vast majority of ADHD is in mainstream education in the 1980s and 90s. I found it to be a total nightmare. I recently saw an old photograph of myself as a 5-year-old in a busy classroom, and it must have been the first day or so or something. But honestly, I felt for that kid. It was written all over my face. It was hell. No, the little boy's face, it just says, "Get me out of here." I can't remember, because honestly, my working memory is truly awful. But I can imagine that little boy was wishing nothing more than to be sort of transported out of all that noise and emotions and hullabaloo and back to the woods and fields up at home where it was peaceful. I mean, how lucky was I to have a home like that to escape to? I actually did that a few times as well. But other than playing football and falling head over heels in love with a girl who later became the mother of my children, I hated school. These days I dropped my kids off at 2 fantastic schools, and I'm blown away by how much they enjoy it. They play outside, do the forest school things, and plenty of sports and interactive learning. They learn in all sorts of interesting ways, and the teachers are encouraging them every step of the way. It's so different to the old sit still and focus on the chalkboard for 6 hours that ruined mine and millions of others' younger years. It was not pretty. We weren't suited to it. Honestly, I can't remember completing more than a couple of assignments through school either. I can remember being incredibly overwhelmed by all the other kids running around, falling out, making out, shouting, screaming, bullying each other, and bullying me, and it was frankly horrible. And I know not all neurodivergents have that experience, and that's a wonderful thing. I'm pleased about that. But even though tons of neurodivergent people excel at school, many of us didn't, especially back then. So, in the end, I left school when I was about 15, although I hadn't really attended sort of the previous year or so. So going back to the farm where the animals and a handful of family members let me mooch around, helping out and daydreaming was the biggest relief I'd experienced at that age. It was freedom. In hindsight, I was ridiculously lucky. I think if I'd been an urban kid, I suspect I may have fallen into the trap a lot of ADHDers have experienced. Life on the streets or in prisons seem prone to. And my heart goes out to them all. They needed nature, they needed space, they needed time. I was so lucky. But anyway, throughout school, I barely read a page, and I developed that common ADHD view of myself that went something like, I'm dumb, I'm useless, I'm inadequate, I'm lazy, I'm a terrible person. And I think after years of feeling like a fish swimming the wrong way in a particularly overcrowded river, I was used to being overwhelmed and burnt out and exhausted. And I stopped playing football. which I'd used to sort of self-regulate. You know, you could go off and play and use your body and be creative. It was great. It was great, really. But once I stopped, I started daydreaming again, and I think, or more intensely. And I think most of it was, fictional scenarios where, everything would suddenly work out for me, or I'd find a way to reach my potential, and everyone would see that I'm actually a really decent person, or a great guy, or talented, or whatever it was. There were tons of story ideas as well. I did a lot of writing, or attempted to write, because learning how to write wasn't possible for me. I hadn't paid attention at school, so there was no chance of me becoming a novelist or anything like that. I certainly wasn't going to make a living out of it. But I think daydreaming was really a big thing, because it inhibited any sort of development at that stage. It was just escapism. It's a bit like gaming or falling into other probably less healthy coping mechanisms. Escapism is, I think, it's necessary at times when you're undiagnosed and you're struggling. But at that time, I got lucky. I think I was working on the farm a little bit and trying to hide away from the world, and then I found the collection of National Geographic magazines in my grandparents' living room, it was, and I used to go in there, and it was the first time anything, apart from the odd English or history lesson at school, I think that was the first time I actually took an academic interest of any kind. And I remember all this information, this archaeology going into my head, and it just triggered this fascination. To be honest with you, it's still with me now. It became what is my special interest, and that special interest is a term we Spectrum peeps hold with reverence. It's dinosaurs or archaeology or whatever it is. It becomes our main thing in our little world. But yeah, so carrying on with that, at the time when I found archaeology, and I do see it that way, that I found it sort of rescued me, really. But I'd got no academic qualifications whatsoever at that time. But this is probably a tip of the cap to their hyperfocus and the potential that ADHDers have. I went from having nothing whatsoever in terms of academic qualifications, and within, I think it was in about 3 years, I was at Liverpool Uni, and I was probably the proudest person ever to wear the ancient history and archaeology hoodie. It was a whirlwind turnaround. I can't remember the route. I'm trying to think about the route. I remember it being very stressful because it wasn't a straightforward route either. I had to get bits of qualifications to get onto an access course at Derby Uni, and then next year on to Liverpool. But just going back to when archaeology entered the scene at that point, I want to say how amazing that experience was. Because honestly, I never really had an interest outside of, football and my imagination. But I think just finding the subject interesting, it actually meant more than that. It turned my focus around from a really poor view of myself to being swept along with excitement. But yeah, listen, I think we're going to just kind of a really, really super quick break, and then I'm going to breeze through the next bit because I'm really keen to get to the point where I got to this, the point of doing this podcast. So see you in a second. So yeah, welcome back. Just carrying on from where I was. This is about archaeology now. It sort of gave me, it was a missing piece of the puzzle. It explained to me why things are, the way things are. How do I say that? It explained why things are the way they are. So it sort of gave perspective, which I'd not had before. The world had never really made sense to me. I could see pathways from right now, or the present moment, all the way back through time about how we evolved and developed toolkits to head out into the world, and why we had cities and wars and grudges and religions and all these things. And the world started to make more sense. And I think as a dysregulated young person, I found comfort and meaning in the stories that archaeologists were endeavouring to piece together. And yeah, sort of on that note, I think archaeology is a wonderful field for people on the spectrum because it's a discipline that has so many fascinating subcategories and areas to hyper-focus on. And you get these really big questions and searches and wonderfully scientific, and it's honest in its approach to uncover what is essentially the truth. That's what we're looking for. Why are we here? Who are we? What happened? It's one massive sweeping story. It is the greatest story ever told or never told. It's unfolding dig by dig in labs and with cutting edge technology. Yet you can throw a lifetime into studying a pottery style or a language or migration or whatever takes your fancy. Plus, you can literally dig in soil and dust and sand and search for artifacts and information. It's a career that I think attracts many neurodivergent people. Anyway, if I was romanticising how archaeology plucked me from ADHD burnout and gave me meaning to life, I still... Well, at the time I was still undiagnosed, and ADHD isn't the sort of neurodevelopmental disorder or condition to that lets you skip to happily ever after. You know, don't get me wrong. When I first got to Liverpool Uni, those first few weeks of lectures, it was like a dream. The ancient Mediterranean went into my ears like music, as did Archaeology 101, Egyptology, and all the other lectures. I definitely found my jam, but all those years of missing out at school on basic education, it really spiked my imposter syndrome, and all those other students were streets ahead of me, in all these areas, as far as I could tell anyway. And throwing some social overwhelm and being a fresher, which is an experience in itself, the wheels sort of fell off, to be honest. I got there, loved it, but I think I left by Christmas. I burnt out. I remember going home and crying like a baby and being stuck in my room for weeks. I tried to go back again, I think, the following term, but I think was it the following year? Anyway, I left in a spring, either that spring or the spring after, and I headed back to the farm. But by then, fortunately, I'd already signed up as a volunteer for an excavation in Turkey with Doug Baird of Liverpool Uni, and he was gracious enough to let me come on the dig still, despite dropping out. But, and honestly, those 6 weeks in Turkey was incredible. I struggled badly with social overwhelm, being in close proximity with 20-odd people for weeks on end. But, socially anxious people who overthink absolutely everything will do that. And I think, despite all that, the excavation, it was a dream come true. I remember going out onto the digs thinking that this is a dream come true. I can't believe I'm here. And I think that was Pinabasha, I think it was way back in 2004, and it was the last season of about a 10-year dig, which was essentially a multi-period site. And I was lucky that I got to excavate on a Bronze Age cist burial, however we want to say it. And I was lucky enough to excavate a Byzantine skeleton as well. And I think on the last day, I got my trowel unearthed a top of a Natufian individual, which is way, way back. But it was the last day of the dig, so we called him Ufuk. 2 years later, I was still out of uni, but Doug let me go out to his, at the time, unexcavated site at Bonjukla, which turned out to be sort of a much smaller precursor to the nearby Çatalhöyük, which is definitely worth a Google. I was lucky enough to go back out several times. I think it was 07, 08, 09, something like that. And I think it was about 08 when I sort of chatting with lecturers and hanging around with PhDs and so on out in Turkey. I ended up going back to uni in 2008. And I think just to highlight the way ADHD can get in the way of an honest academic endeavour, I got through most of my second year when I went back in 08. But I was burning out so badly. I think certainly by third year, I could barely read. As much as I loved archaeology, I couldn't put it into my head. I couldn't read anymore. I couldn't think about it anymore. And I don't think I was able to study at all for the last sort of set of exams. or pretty much any of them, the final assignments. My dissertation, I managed to do a lot of that in about a week. I think it was disastrous, but I had some good study buddies, and Doug helped me out a little bit. And in the end, I think I got a 2-1. So I didn't fail. I did okay, but and the thing is, this is just a common ADHD thing. It wasn't all about sort of the academics thing or the job that you've got or the life that you've got. It's relationships and social groups. I think more than studying, I think when I got to graduation, I just felt like I'd failed. I hadn't, but I felt like I'd failed badly. And I couldn't see archaeology as a career. I thought, I can't be an academic, and I can't do it. And I can't go off and get a job as an archaeologist because everyone's telling me how crap that is. So in the end, I went back home again at the end of all that, which is I was emotional about it, to be honest. I didn't. It felt like I had such love for archaeology, and I wanted to be an archaeologist. Yet something was stopping me becoming an archaeologist, and I didn't know what it was. I just thought, you don't question that. You just see yourself as a failure, as a bad person. So and it's all just part of having a hypersensitive nervous system, to be honest. And missing social cues and messing up and forgetting all these things, you build up an awful picture of yourself if you're not careful. I think most undiagnosed ADHDers have done this. So I went home and I hid on the farm, and unfortunately I bumped into my childhood sweetheart, and we had 4 kids in 6 years, which obviously kind of took over our lives, and our unresolved traumas and issues were repeatedly hammered back and forth. But I think anyone who's got kids will tell you it's it is pretty full on, and you don't have time for anything else. The kids become your priorities. But I think you probably see where this is going. By this time, I sort of had a mental breakdown when I was about 39. I think about what was that, 2020-ish, something like that. I had a big old mental breakdown, and to be honest with you, it ended up being the best thing that has ever happened to me, because it made me look at myself in a different way. What is going on? What on earth is going on? And I got my ADHD diagnosis, and goodness me, what a moment that was. It is like somebody all of a sudden telling you that actually it wasn't massively your fault. It was inevitable that you struggled and suffered with depression and anxiety and weren't able to do the things that you wanted to do, or you certainly weren't able to reach your potential. But I still have that love of archaeology. I'll always find something to read or a documentary to watch, or follow pages on social media where there's a really good ADHD community, by the way. I found that really helpful, and getting all that self-awareness and becoming part of a community. I am part, there's a small amount of us, and we've all had similar experiences. That knowledge alone is, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, to be honest with you. It's a game changer. You have to rewire your brain. You have to relearn everything and look back with compassion and develop self-love, and life just keeps getting easier and easier the more awareness you have. And that's why we want to talk about the positives of ADHD and autism and neurodiversity, is because we need to hear it. We deserve to hear it, because it's not all bad. We might not fit into an education system or certain work environments, but what we can offer is different perspectives and creativity and ingenuity. inspiration for the podcast came from seeing people say, oh, ADHD is a superpower, and Einstein and Da Vinci and Newton and entrepreneurs these days, all these geniuses, they were on the spectrum. And it makes you think, well, hang on, how long has it been around, and how much has the spectrum influenced humanity? Would we have ever even got out of Africa without it? Would we have invented the wheel and boats and microliths and pyramids and all the things we understand? And how different would the world be? Would we have survived even? I don't think we would have. I think, there's plenty of people out there saying that we need neurodiversity, and I think with this podcast, what I really want to do is play with that and enjoy that, and let people who have maybe just been diagnosed, or they're undiagnosed, or they've been diagnosed for years and they still feel like crap, listening to what we're trying to do on this podcast. And hopefully, if you can take away just some nugget of information, or one of those wonderful subliminal senses of pride, just take that with you, because we do deserve to be proud of it. And I'm not saying that we're better or worse or anything like that. All I'm saying is it's been a rough ride for a lot of us, and there's been a lot of negative self-talk and a lot of negative labeling. And I think if we can continue to look for better ways to express ourselves, or better ways to live, and find our special interests and our talents, or just be left alone. We live in this world, and I think what I really want this podcast to do is more than to say, this happened, that could have been a neurodivergent person, we should be proud of that. I think we should just be excited by it as well. Archaeology explains so much about why the world is the way it is, as does history. I think with this, I'm trying to put it in words. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit emotional about this, because this podcast is an expression of how I feel, and I'm not on my own. So please be proud to be neurodivergent, and be understanding of neurodivergence, and be optimistic if you can, because I think neurodivergent people have had a massive impact on the way the world is today. And I think we've got a massive, massive role to play in the future as well. So thanks very much for listening, and listen out for future episodes, because we have got some fantastic guests coming on, and I'm going to be throwing myself back into some daydreaming, or at least I'm going to be employing my imagination to do some solo episodes on what it would be like to be neurodivergent at certain places and times, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, you lot take care of yourselves, and I'll look forward to seeing you again. Take care. Bye-bye.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.